Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today it is time to have a look at the aviation side of things of the suggestions passed to developers for August of 2022. I know I'm a little bit behind when it comes to these ones, but I'm going to take the next week to get ahead again. So we have the stuff from August to look at, and also the stuff from September as well, which just released. So don't worry, we'll get to it as it comes out. Let's have a look at the aviation options. The first vehicle is the North American A5B Vigilante. This vehicle was originally designed under the name of the A3J2 as a supersonic carrier-based bomber, capable of delivering nuclear ordnance at high altitude, speed, and also range relative to other aircraft at the time. The A5B was developed from the A5A, and its purpose was to expand the ground attack capability of the airframe and the range of the aircraft by adding an additional 2 pylons under the wings for conventional weapons or drop tanks, and a larger internal fuel capacity by adding a hump to the spine of the aircraft. A total of only 18 A5B aircraft were actually built, and by the late 60s, all of them had been converted into RA5Cs, which are reconnaissance versions, along with the A5C prototypes. The A5 replaced the Douglas A3 Sky Warrior as the US Navy's primary nuclear strike bomber for a time, but didn't see very much success in that role. However, its reconnaissance variant, the RA5C, saw extensive use and service in the Vietnam War. It never got a true replacement after it was phased out due to the increase in popularity of reconnaissance pods like TARPs for the Grumman F-14 Tomcat, and throughout the testing and service of the A5, it broke some records, including an altitude record of 91,450.8 feet while carrying a 1,000-kilo payload. This thing had 2 General Electric J-79GE8 engines, and then also when it comes to the actual payloads it could carry, so it could carry nuclear bombs, the Mark 27, 28, and 43. It could also carry a 1,000-pound firebomb, and also practice bomb containers. From usual bombs, it could carry the Mark 81, 82, 83, and 84s, all the different poundage size of standard dumb bombs, Aero 7Ds, which of course are the Mighty Mouse pods, the Lao 10A for the Zunis, the Aero 6A for some more Mighty Mouses, and of course the A7M3-J and A7M3-J, which of course are the AGM-12B and the AGM-12C, which were designated for the use for the US Navy. The next vehicle is the Fairey Battle, and this was a 3-seat monoplane attack aircraft designed to replace the earlier Hawker Hart and also Hind biplane light bombers in the early 30s. It had a clean airframe, metal skin, fabric-covered control surfaces, and also a retractable landing gear. A large internal bomb bay could hold up to 1,000 pounds of bombs, and the aircraft could carry 500 pounds more on external racks. The Battle had a crew of 3. It had the pilot, a defensive gunner, and also a navigator observer. Gun armament was very light on the vehicle though, consisting of only a single fixed 77mm machine gun in the right wing, and also a second machine gun for the rear gunner. Pilots found the aircraft to be very stable and very easy to fly. However, the Battle lacked armor or self-sealing fuel tanks, making it very vulnerable to enemy fire and also obsolete within a year of its introduction. Despite this, it was widely used in the RAF light bomber squadrons up to the 1940s, when they were replaced by other aircraft such as the Wellingtons that we have in the game. Battles were used extensively during the German invasion of France, where they were flown in low-altitude targeted attacks against German ground forces and suffered severe losses. They were eventually switched to night bombing, which reduced the loss rate involved, and South African battles performed better in the East African theatre, facing less advanced German and also Italian aircraft. The vehicle itself was powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin II 12-cylinder inline. It had a maximum speed of 413 kilometers an hour, and once again would be able to carry 4 250-pound bombs in an internal bomb load bomb area, and then 500 pounds of bombs externally on top of it. The number built, there was over 2,000 of these things built, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. For Japan, you have the Mitsubishi A7M3-J Experimental Reppū Kai, which unfortunately never existed. So this vehicle was another one of the Japanese wonder weapons designed to counter the B-29. By the time of the 1943, information about the US's in-development B-29 Superfortress heavy bomber had been collected by Japanese intelligence to a considerable degree. While the full capabilities to expect from the bomber were not perfectly clear, its potential to conduct bombing raids on the Japanese home islands from extreme range were very serious to the Japanese. The Japanese Army and Navy recognized the necessity of high-altitude fighters to counter strategic bombing at this time, and ordered into development several of these types, such as the Army's Ki-87 and Ki-94, and the Navy's J-5N, J-6K, and also J-7W. However, new aircraft developments would not be in time for the expected deployment of the B-29 due to the difference in starting dates, and the Navy sought interim solutions using existing fighter airframes, with fuselages large enough for modification to house a turbocharger. In early 1944, the successor to the famous Ryzen, that being the Mitsubishi A7 Reppū, was selected to such a platform due to its large airframe. Furthermore, as the standard Reppū was not expected to satisfy its performance requirements due to the underperformance of the NK-9K engine at that stage of the war, this was perhaps a measure to save the project from its cancellation. The high-altitude variant, the first variant of the Reppū, will later be named the A7M3-J Experimental Reppū Kai, and research started at the beginning of 1944 before the completion of the first A7M1 prototype. This aircraft, unfortunately, never really went along. It was supposed to have 6 Type 5 30mm MGs, strong armor protection even covering the magazines. The turbocharged engine and also unreasonable features increased the weight and size compared to the base A7M, giving this plane inferior performance at low altitude compared to the A7M2, but superior at extreme altitudes. But unfortunately, since this vehicle, there isn't a ton of detailed information on it, this plane itself doesn't have a lot of stuff going on. According to the extant documented materials, the Reppū Kai prototype was actually in a stage of assembly before the end of the war. This is because the Reppū Kai was not a late development of the A7M, but was started rather early into the project. If not for the bombing of Mitsubishi Nagoya, it was not unlikely that this plane would have been completed before the surrender. So therefore, this plane was not completed, it was never flown, it was never test flew, it was never flown in the configuration that it was designed for, it is therefore a paper aircraft. The Chinese suggestion is for another F-5. This is the AIDC F-5E Tiger 2000. Which is an upgrade, of course, of the standard F-5E. The Republic of China on the Taiwan island and the ROCAF was already a long-time user of Northrop's F-5 Freedom Fighter. They used it since 1972 with the F-5A. They also signed agreements with Northrop in 1968 to build the F-5E and also the F-5F on the island itself, although their attempt to actually buy the F-4E in view of a counter-attack on the Chinese mainland unfortunately didn't really go through. Under the new agreements, Northrop would allow additional F-5E series to be built by AIDC to the total number of 308 of them. These F-5E series served for about 2 decades until the missile crisis, even with the additional FCK-1s and F-16 Block 20s which were introduced to the ROCAF. They expected to have a squadron operating F-5Es as reserve in case of the worst scenario happened, and the aging airframe and avionics certainly were nowhere enough for the masses of PLAAF aircraft in the late 90s. While Northrop had given their plan for a new F-5 family, the F-20 Tiger Shark, a decade earlier, AIDC came up with their solution of upgrading their F-5Es to the F-5E Tiger 2001. The plan of upgrading these aging aircraft was about the fire control system, most notably. It was the NCSIST GD-53 Gold Dragon, which had the ability to fire the ARH-AAM and a new NATO data link on board as well. The new radar also came with Doppler navigation, which really helped on ground strike operations, and the only prototype rolled out in 2001, and it also has a pretty cool Tiger Streaks camo. Due to the ROCAF planning to decommission all of its F-5Es in the next decade, and no other Asian countries showed any interest on the upgrade program, the project bit the dust, and the remaining F-5E series had to struggle on for the next 2 decades until the new AIDC T5AJT ultimately replaced them. For the Italians, we had the Piaggio P.32. This was an Italian medium bomber, which was designed in 1934. The prototype itself was completed in 1936 and also approved for production, with 17 of them overall being built. In 1937, they were sent to an active squadron. However, the bombers were deemed difficult to fly, underpowered, slow, and also poorer of handling in the air than the BR-20 or the Sparviero, the SM-79. 12 aircraft of an improved version were built, replacing the original Isotta Fraschini ASO 11 inline engines with more powerful Piaggio P11 radial engines, which gave it about 150 more horsepower. These improved engines were designated the Piaggio P32-2s. The new engines improved the rate of climb but decreased range due to increased fuel consumption, and in addition, the increased weight of the new engines meant that these aircraft did not have any improvements in speed over the earlier models. In 1938, the P-32s were taken out of active service and used as training aircraft, and none of them survived the war. There was also another design, which was the P-32 bis. This was attempted to further improve performance by reducing the weight of the aircraft, but the prototype crashed, and the project was not pursued any further. When it comes to bomb loads, there is actually no information on what those bomb loads would be. So according to the poster, there was a maximum 1,600 kilo bomb load options. So therefore you'd probably get 3250 kilo bombs, or 1,600, or 8 200 kilo bombs. The vehicle itself could hardly fly though, so adding extra weight is probably a bad idea. The French get the Breguet BR-1050 Alizé. This was a French naval bomber from the Cold War, and it's kind of similar in its general design to the Fairey Battle from the British. It had 3 crew, a pilot, a radar operator, and a navigator. It was also powered by a turboprop engine, the Rolls-Royce Dart, the RDA 7 Mark 21 variant. This vehicle didn't have any offensive armament in the form of guns. Instead, it was all about the armament underneath. So it could carry a torpedo of 500 kilo with 2 160 kilogram depth charges on it. Also, it could carry some more in the belly and under the wing, some depth charges, and some rocket pods as well. It could also carry some AS-12s, 2 of them, which are, of course, the guided missiles, and, of course, more depth charges. So this thing, basically right now in War Thunder, will be able to carry torpedoes and the wire-guided missiles. Maybe in the future, it will be able to carry stuff such as mines or general bombs, which could work as well. There was many different variants of this vehicle, and any could make it into the game. The Israelis get an early configuration of the B-17G, or the war configuration, whichever you want to call it. Basically, this is a slightly different variant of the B-17G. It was the only heavy bomber in the ranks of the Israeli Air Force. While the Israeli B-17G already is in War Thunder, it uses what is known as the late configuration that was used in the 1956 Suez Crisis, and also is incredibly similar to its American counterpart. This is looking at a different one, which used different armaments and machinery on board, to try and get the B-17s into the war, as they were considered to be one of the most valuable assets for the Israelis. We'll talk about their acquisition and then also the armaments themselves, because, as we said, they're a bit different. Prior to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Israelis had invested tremendous efforts in attempts to find and smuggle military aircraft from across the world into Israel. As such, one of the main places to look was the US, where the Israelis employed the help of Al Schwimmer, an American-Israeli flight engineer who worked for TWA during World War II and owned an aircraft repair and maintenance factory in Burbank, California. Initially, Schwimmer found success in getting and delivering transport aircraft, such as C-46s and C-47s, of which he managed to add 13 to the IAF's inventory in early 48. However, seeking a more substantial addition to the growing Air Force, Schwimmer returned to the US one more time to acquire bombers. Initially, the Israeli command were mainly interested in the idea of getting B-25s, as those were among the readily available bombers after World War II. However, those would have been borderline impossible to smuggle out of America in the face of the embargo, as the B-25 had not seen any civilian use after the war. Due to this deterrent, Schwimmer decided to buy examples of the most readily available American bomber, which was the B-17, as some examples of it were civilianized, which could be exploited. Schwimmer managed to find and purchase 4 demilitarized B-17Gs, and these were converted into transports and also flown by Universal Aviation in Tulsa, Oklahoma for photographic mapping purposes, and also one was found in Tulsa and was the only one to still retain its turrets, which were still unarmed though. Initially, it was planned to refurbish the aircraft before departure. However, due to the urgent need of these aircraft in Israel, it was decided to only leave one of them to be refurbished, as it was not flight-worthy. The 3 flight-worthy aircraft began their journey and were re-registered under Israeli colors. The B-17s hopscotched through many different locations to avoid the American authorities in pursuit of flying from Miami to Puerto Rico to the Azores, and after getting approval to fly over French airspace, flew to Zatek in Czechoslovakia, which was the main site of the Israeli airlift operations, to bring arms from Czechoslovakia to Israel during the war. The fate of the 4th B-17 was not so fortunate, as the story of the 3 B-17s who made it to Israel made it very difficult for it to be smuggled as well, and during the attempt to do so, the B-17 and its crew ended up being caught, and the aircraft never made it to Israel in the end, leaving the Israeli inventory with just 3 B-17s. Similarly, any further attempts to smuggle bombers out of America were no longer feasible, despite Schwimmer's further attempt to purchase A-20 medium bombers for the war effort. So when we have a look at these actual vehicles, the armaments were 4 7.92mm or 7.62mm machine guns, likely to be Besom machine guns, positioned such that 2 guns are in the waist openings and 2 guns are used in the tail opening without a standard turret. They use 70 kilo and 250 kilo German bombs for a total weight of up to 2,700 kilos, hung in both the bomb bay and also external bomb racks under the wings. The last one is for Finland, and it's for the J-35XS, which is one of the export variants that Finland was designing and building for the overall market. Basically, Finland used the Swedish Saab J-35 jets in its history. It also used MiG-21s from the USSR and many variants of that. So the general idea was to try and mix a few of these ideas. Finland used stuff like R-13Ms and also R-3Ss that they bought from the Soviet Unions, along with, of course, the MiG-21s. The plane itself would receive a certain camouflage, and the X in its name means export, and the S is for Suomi. So basically, the J-35XS is derived from the J-35F. It would have 1 internal 30mm Eden cannon and also carry 4 sidewinders. So technically this could be fitted with Soviet missiles. So this is kind of, I suppose you'd class it as Western technology, which would also be able to carry Eastern technology weapons, which is kind of interesting. So that's pretty much it at the end of the day. So those are all the suggestions past the developers for August of 2022. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank Forge, Siegebreak, Carrion Crow, Nicholas Richardson, Elove Goat, Pyman, Winter Scientist, Merciless Reaper, Orange Tail, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, and also Sem Arslan, Wilkski, Uncle Bean, Derek R., Bareen, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.